The emperor said that the empire's first princess, Sylvanus Aristinus, was going to Irugo. The guards who were standing nearby thought, "Will the princess really be sent to these barbarians?" Some of them said that even though a girl and a half-breed, but His Majesty is too cruel. The emperor said she was a useless girl, and she was lucky that someone like her was fit for a marriage of convenience. Princess Aristinus Sylvanus of the empire, having become a loyal tool of the emperor's father, she is destined to marry a native of a neighboring country's family. A month later, Aristine traveled to Irugo in order to tie the bonds of marriage, obeying my father's orders without saying a word, or so it seemed to everyone. When she got into the carriage, she turned straight to the castle and said they were going to die, all in their ditch. She smiled happily afterward. As she drove, she was glad she was finally away from this dreary village and her boring dad. Father Emperor did many atrocities, and all for the sake of being seen as great. Once when Aristine opened her eyes, she saw closed windows and a room that was all on fire. And ever since then she was tormented by insomnia, because if she woke up a little later, she would be already in the other world. She was only 6 years old, and then she saw the emperor looking at her as if she were trash. He was the one who had closed all the windows and started the fire. Her lungs burned so hot, and her hands and feet were covered in blisters. But it was her heart that hurt the most. So unbearable that she wished her father dead in a fire, and after her sister's accident, she was imprisoned. And they put her away for 10 years. That was enough to turn her heart to ashes. But thanks to her confinement, the memory of her past life came back to her. She was able to escape, but when Raunel returns, but she interrupted herself at these thoughts, and said she needed to think about her future first. Irugo is the empire of the staff and fire, a land of barbarians, distant lands surrounded by magical beasts. These barbarian brats intercourse with the dynamonic beasts because they are not of any race. And a girl has to share a bed with a brat like that, though perhaps her future husband would be more human-like than herself. That's what the emperor told her. Her father's words still echoed in her head like an echo. The girl thought that perhaps he wanted to curse her fiance. Her father has long despised Irugo, and having lost in battle, hated his people many times more. Since ancient times, the Sylvanus Empire has prided itself on its military successes. However, the lands of Irugo has failed to be captured, and the emperor's father wished to go down in history as the conqueror of these territories. But it didn't work out, and Tarkin, Aristine's future husband, was to blame. In order to stop the bloody war, the Sylvanus Empire offered to make peace. And since the Irugo Empire was overrun with monsters, war was a heavy burden for them, so they agreed. And so the long battle finally came to an end, and the new alliance was created out of it. But in fact, the emperor has no intention of ending the war. He proposed a truce to buy time. First, he would let Irugo's guard down, and he will secretly prepare for a new war. And his daughter Aristine has simply become his obedient pawn, all to secretly kill her and blame Irugo for it. After all, her death would be the perfect reason to break the treaty and start the war again. Aristine suddenly wondered if her father knew that under the skin of his sacrificial sheep lurked a wolf with sharp fangs. But first she must gain the support of her new man. From the moment Aristine had been brought by the regular road instead of the portal, she had sensed something amiss, and she wasn't wrong. For nearly 10 days she was kept in the carriage. Her legs and arms were as numb as if they were not her own, and every time she started to change her clothes, the knights would knock on the windows of her carriage. But then she was suddenly asked to go outside, and we had a little tea party outdoors. It was all too weird. But the girl thought it wasn't time yet, and should behave as usual, so that no one would suspect, quietly and peacefully. As Aristine was starting to drink her tea, a girl came up to her and accidentally knocked over a kettle of water on her. The girl apologized to the princess and said she was an accident. She smiled evilly. When the girls around saw the princess, they said she was as wet as a garbage rat. It's the perfect match for a barbarian. But at that moment she seemed to wake up and continued to stare at her cup. Nothing happened. Emperor's eyes, the feature her father so desperately desires. She didn't even think she would be the one to awaken that power. It is the power to see the past, present, as well as the future. It is also called the all-seeing eye. Suddenly she saw the girl from her vision start to approach her, and she thought it was obvious. Aristine assumed that it would happen exactly as she saw it, and as she realized, that accident would happen soon. When the girl with the teapot came closer to Aristine, she thought it was her turn. But at that moment, Aristine got up from her chair and hit the tray of hot water so that it doused that girl. Immediately there were burns on her face. They went around her and told her to get some ice water. One of the guests asked what she had done to Lady Bridie. At that moment, the girl thought that everything was right, and it was completely different from what she had seen through the eyes of the Emperor. Suddenly a girl came up to Aristine and asked her what she was doing, but she asked why she was asking such questions. The girl explained that she had just decided to come up, and didn't understand why she was questioning her as if she were a criminal. Aristine asked the girl, "Does she really have to raise her like a nanny?" The girl was shocked. She didn't even know what to say. She didn't understand why this girl was acting so brazen. Then Aristine realized that she would probably not be able to do without a nanny. The girl was very angry when she heard this. Then the girl thought it was just what she needed to say. She asked what it meant. At this point, the girl with the burns screamed that she would now have a scar. Suddenly, someone told her not to worry, because as soon as they got to Irugo, a doctor would be called and he would cure her. Besides, there was only 2 weeks of traveling left. As the girl ran away from Aristine, then reflected that these people could not even imagine what they might suffer in place of their victim. It was only after her act that they realized they could be hurt too. Bridie's scar will be a reminder that the victim can bite too. Aristine decided that until they got to Irugo, she would leave it at that. But after seeing the future, she decided to make adjustments. Unfortunately, she can't control her powers yet. Well, if she'd done nothing, it would have ended badly. As the girl walked away, she thought she had heard that Aristine, and what a weirdo she was, had been kept under lock and key for over a decade. So she's no better than an uneducated commoner. But the girl didn't understand where she got her temper from. But she interrupted herself at these thoughts and thought it was most likely a simple accident. But she thought it would be easier when the Emperor told her to harass Aristine. But in fact, it was the opposite. The girl thought that next time it would definitely be different. After a while, the two girls picked up Aristine's outfit, dropped it on the floor, and started stomping their feet on it. One of them said, "What shall we do now? The princess has nothing else to change into." The girl didn't know what to do with the filth now. She said that Aristine was a princess, so she wouldn't like their pathetic outfits. But she was used to such rags. When Aristine heard this, she took her things and ran to the carriage. The girl who was hurting Aristine didn't realize what had happened. Since the day she doused the servant girl, no longer bullied her as often as before. At worst, they were only ruining her clothes. Aristine realized that they thought it might hurt her. Compared to their attempt to pour boiling water on her, it was only child's play. Aristine thought the clothes were dirty, sure, but they were many times more comfortable than a wedding dress. After all, it's just a political marriage, and if she needs to, she'll sew something new. When she looked at the dress that the girls had ruined, she thought that it was unlikely that she would be able to wear that outfit anymore anyway. It was her wedding dress. Suddenly she realized at last what the Emperor was up to. It was no surprise to her that her dress had gotten that way. At this time, at the west gate of Irugo, the two guys who were guarding the entrance were talking. One of them said he had heard that the people of Sylvanus were cunning and dangerous, but his partner said they were just pathetic bayagas. Suddenly a third man came up to them and said that their princess would faint as soon as she saw them. But their chief looked down and said that a delegation from Sylvanus would be arriving soon, and they would have to meet them. At that moment, various carriages arrived at the gate. One of the riders said that he was Antel by order of Emperor Sylvanus, Knight of Sylvanus, who accompanies Princess Aristina to Irugo. When they pulled up, the guards were very surprised as to why they didn't use a teleporter, but came by carriage, even though they sure spared no expense on the crew. The second asked how they could fight on such a thing. Then Antel leaned toward them and asked, "So, they are not ambassadors, but Irugo warriors?" At that moment, the boys thought he was even looking down on them. The maids wore expensive outfits, and even the carriage was richly decorated. The guards thought that looking at such things, it would be obvious what kind of princess she would be. And then the knight said that Princess Aristine was in front of them. At that moment, a girl began to emerge from the carriage. The guards were very surprised and asked if they were serious. How could it be a princess? The guys started looking at her and thought she was like a little ball of wool. The girl was very dirty. The carriage and escort are luxurious, but the princess is a filthy ragamuffin. One of the chiefs immediately realized what Emperor Sylvanus had in mind. The Emperor wants Aristina to look as pathetic as possible. Having lost the war, the Emperor is biding his time. and he absolutely didn't care how the girl was treated. He ordered that the girl be shown as dirty as possible, and the knights had to show that the power of the empire was still great. But the princess must be worse than a dead rat. The emperor wants to show the people of Irugo where they belong, and the girl is perfect for it. That was ridiculous. The warriors got very angry and asked if their master's wedding was some kind of a joke to them. They are behaving too arrogantly. Aristine, hearing this, thought that this was what she had expected. But even now she had nothing to fear. She boldly approached their commander and wondered if this was her future spouse. Tarkin went out to the gate to meet the girl in person. It was clear to Aristine at a glance that this man was not without power. Besides, he was quite handsome. At that moment Tarkin bowed to the girl and said, "Welcome to your highness." When Aristine heard that, she thought that he also had such a velvety voice. It was strange enough for her. He may look harsh, but he treats the girl in a friendly manner. She looked at him and wondered if he was too polite for a prince. And at that point the guy said his name was Durante and he would be her chaperone. The girl did not expect that this man was not Tarkin at all, so she was very surprised. Aristine said if she could ask where her future spouse was. The boy replied that he had gone hunting. Aristine was surprised that he went hunting without even waiting for his fiance. It didn't look like their union was going to be amorous at all. Then the girl sighed and said that apparently her fiance was rather modest. When the men heard this, they were very surprised. And Durante explained that it wasn't that at all. It was just that they had been attacked by monsters. Aristine thought it meant that the hunt was not for ordinary beasts, but for monsters. If her arrival had been sudden, she would still understand his departure. But then the girl asked why they hadn't told her about it before. Durante bowed and said that once she asked a question, he immediately answered it. It was all true. Not one word he said was a lie. Aristine said that a person can deceive another person in many ways, and by keeping the truth from her in the first place, he's already a liar. Aristine figured that if this was their first meeting, she could do as she pleased. She could, of course, keep making an idiot of herself. But somehow she feels like this place is completely different from the Empire, and from now on, people will stop looking down on her, both those who should protect her and those who hate her. In other words, at this point, no one is relying on her. You could say she can start from scratch. And she doesn't have to live up to anyone's expectations anymore. Aristine then said that in the future she hoped Durante would not lie to her again. Durante thought at that moment that even though her face was covered in dirt, her eyes shone like stars in the night sky. He thought she was looking straight into her highness's soul, and the truth was different from their expectations. Then suddenly the girls came up and asked how they even dared to call her majesty dirty. The other girl said, "Could an unmarried woman wear Irugo's clothes before even entering the palace?" That was the reaction to Durante's suggestion that she wash off the dirt and change beforehand. They didn't care about her at all before that, Aristine thought. The girl thought it was obvious to everyone here that they were making a scandal on purpose. If there is no lord in the castle, they hope that Durante will slacken. After this incident, Durante and his partner went somewhere. The guy asked if he was going to leave it at that. These people are looking for a fight. But Durante said they simply had no choice. His Majesty has ended the war. If the political alliance is dissolved, there's not even a doubt that all the blame will be in their direction. That's why they have no right to make a mistake. The partner said he didn't even expect Her Highness to be like this. Then all of a sudden another one came up to them and said he liked her. But Durante interrupted them and told them not to say such a thing. She could still turn out to be Sylvanus's mercenary. I wasn't surprised to see carriages parked right in front of the palace. There was the coat of arms of the third Prince of Martin, the arms of Phelamion, and the first princess. There were also many others there as well. It surprised Durante that it was just the day that the Lord couldn't meet his bride because of the monster attack. Other members of the royal family flew in so freely. Suddenly one of the girls noticed Sylvanus's carriage. She was curious who was inside, because it looked luxurious from the outside. The guy said no matter how you dress these things up, you can't hide their rotten nature. At that moment the carriage stopped, and Aristine stepped out of it. The carriage stopped at that moment, and Aristine stepped out of it. A large number of eyes that pierced her from head to toe like arrows. It's how they welcome a bride from a distant land. People whispered, saying what kind of an unassuming mouse with a lousy pedigree. That's their princess? One of the girls said she expected to see the beautiful princess of Sylvanus, and they were handed some lowly bastard. Some other girl said that Aristine must have put up with all the bullying before just based on the hope that this place would be different. It was all stifling hostility and caustic taunts. Durante thought that even the ladies who had arrived from the Achava house were bullying the princess instead of protecting her. He did not understand why it was so, but then all of a sudden, as she was walking towards the castle, Antel some things behind her, and at that moment some man grabbed the cloth from him and went on his way. Then Antel started shouting at him, asking him if he knew what silk was, and it's many times more expensive than a chest of dragon gold. Even Emperor Irugo can't afford such a thing. As soon as he looked at the face of the man who had taken the item from him, he immediately fell silent. And at that moment a strange guy threw this cloth over Aristine. He wrapped her so tightly that she couldn't move. The girl did not understand who had put this silk on her. But then suddenly she heard a man's voice. So what if it was the most precious thing in the world? Must belong to my fiance. And at that moment, Aristine looked up at the man who had swept her upward. The girl thought his eyes sparkled as if they were rays of sunlight. Then she realized that this man was Tarkin. When Tarkin held her in his arms, Aristine thought he was so big. Is everyone in Irugo such a giant? With just his appearance, he silenced the Imperials. When he looked, they were immediately frightened. One of the Imperials said that they had just learned that his fiance from Sylvanus was arriving today. Just like that, right in his arms, Tarkin carried his bride to his estate. When they went inside, your girlfriend sat down and was silent. She was embarrassed. Durante walked up to her and told her not to misunderstand him. He only did it because he didn't want his kinfolk walking around. Nadeau looked at her carefully and said she had nothing to do with it. Aristine thought it was natural and it would be strange if she was his type. Sweaty and dirty body. The guy turned to one of the female employees and told them to get her cleaned up. At this moment the girl sat and scrutinized her fiancé. She saw the blood of a demonic beast. Because of the color of the clothes, it's not immediately obvious, but it's definitely soaked in blood. When the girl heard his request, she said that they weren't even married yet. Tarkin began to look at her carefully. He didn't understand why the girl was talking like that. Aristine wondered why he was looking at her like that. He himself offered her to wash her face. Silently she smiled and told her not to worry because he wasn't going to take her after a bath. Who wouldn't be squeamish about touching such a dirty woman? When Aristine heard this, she didn't understand. At that moment, the guy thought that he just wanted to say that she needed to wash herself, but he accidentally offended her. Tarkin thought it was unlikely that Roche in the princess's palace was used to hearing such things, but then realized he didn't care. It would even be better if she misunderstood him. Then the girl said, "I see you're a real pervert." When Tarkin heard this, he was very surprised. After pondering her words for a bit, he said, "What are you saying? On the contrary, I told you I wouldn't get you into bed." Then the girl asked, "Isn't it strange that he would even consider it?" But she respects his choice. Then Tarkin shouted and said, "Actually, she's the one who first talked about doing it together." Aristine said that yes, she was first, but she just doesn't think they should wash together before the wedding. When the guy heard this, he thought she only made such a mess because she was too dirty to share a bath. When he realized what she meant, Tarkin said they would wash separately. Aristine, because of her long confinement in the dungeon, had forgotten that they were in a palace. There must be a lot of bathrooms. Getting up from the couch, the girl said that was a good thing. After that, she went to the employee and asked her to take her to the bathroom. Tarkin looked at the girl and thought she was very strange. He thought she was going to cry. If she is a noble princess of Sylvanus, grow up surrounded by the most expensive things. A pampered noblewoman would not have endured such humiliation. But judging by his surprise, she looked quite different. Tarkin didn't understand why she had such a dirty look at all. And then he thought, since the matter of his wedding had been decided, he never learned anything, or even who would soon become his spouse. At this point, Aristine had already arrived at the bathroom. She was happy that the water was very warm, and when she looked around, she noticed that it was huge. But the girl thought that even if the water wasn't ice cold, she would already be satisfied. She was happy that the water was very warm. Then suddenly several women came in behind her and asked the princess to let her help them. At that moment Aristine thought that only when she was a child did they take such good care of her and bathe her. The girl began to undress. When she got into the water, one of the girls asked if it was hot. After that, the girl said that they would wash her hair and asked her to close her eyes. Gentle attitudes and caressing hands were unfamiliar to the girl, because in the Empire, maids always looked down on her, and now she is being cared for with unprecedented care. In addition, Her future husband is not lacking in talent and charisma, and of course, everyone respects him. Aristine thought that she should definitely get him on her side, no matter what it cost her. When Aristine came out of the bathroom and was wiped down, she asked something wrong, because the girls were looking at her puzzled. One of the workers saw mysterious purple eyes that looked like the twilight sky and silver curls. Then the girl bowed and apologized to the princess for her rudeness. When the palace maids left, Aristine climbed into the tub once more and thought how good it felt. The girl was very tired, and she thought it was worth taking the chance to take a little break. But then suddenly, looking at the water, she saw that something was happening to her, and she thought she had not a moment's peace. Water ripples appeared around the girl, signifying the awakening of the emperor's eyes. The girl wondered what it was this time. When she looked into the water, she saw Tarkin in it. She wondered what period of time it was. She suggested that it might be the present, but looking again, she thought it was either the near future or the past. She wondered how much he didn't like the outfit. Doesn't the blood on it embarrass him at all? Aristine hoped it was the past after all. Marriage may be political, but she hates dirty people. She didn't realize when her fiance was going to wash up, and that's when someone called out to him. When Tarkin turned around, he saw the girl and called her name. It was Diona. The girl asked what he was thinking so deeply about. It wasn't like him. He didn't even immediately notice that she was here. The guy replied that it was no big deal and turned away from her. Then Diona came closer to him and asked him if she might be interested in that princess. Aristine didn't understand why the woman was talking about her, and at that moment, her vision ended. When Aristine snapped out of it, she thought that, judging by her tone, she wasn't even hiding her disdain for her. But she thought so. Such questioning seems to be commonplace for Tarkin as well. Then the girl looked again into the water and saw the bridegroom, who said, "Has she come to my liking, you ask? That's not going to happen. You know that, don't you? That my feelings are unchanging?" Aristine had always known that love was out of the question in a political marriage. The girl reflected that her name seemed to be Diona. That girl didn't look like a maid at all. If this woman was Tarkin's mistress, then things were looking up for Aristine, because she's got another card that could help in this negotiation. Sometime later, when the worker had finished brushing Aristine's hair, she told the princess that she wished her a pleasant rest in her chambers. But Aristine asked her to take her to Tarkin. The maid was very surprised, but said she would. At this point, the girl thought that she was indeed tired, but there was no telling when else she would get another opportunity like this. At this time, there were many people in the delicacies of the Sylvanus Empire, within the inner confines of the palace. Diona, who was pouring tea for Tarkin, thought it was lucky he hadn't changed at all. He has a beautiful, wild beast-like body and a penetrating gaze. Of course, the girl was surprised when he stood up for the princess. But at that moment a maid came into their room and told His Majesty that a princess had arrived to see him. When Diona heard this, she was very surprised. But Tarkin told the maid to let her in. When Aristine walked into the room, the guy thought it was definitely her. So he had the feeling that they were different people. That girl he had seen at the beginning was nothing like the one standing in front of him now. Tarkin looked at her with a surprised look. The girl didn't understand what was wrong, because the palace servants reacted the same way. Then the girl assumed that it must all be because she had gotten rid of her dirty clothes. After that she walked over and sat down on the couch. When Aristine looked at Diona, she thought she had lost all her self-control. And when she wanted to get tea to pour for herself, the girl took the teapot away from her. At this point, Diona thought that the girl might assume that she was looking down on her, and there was no way she could afford to embarrass herself right in front of His Majesty. Diona told the princess that she was glad to meet her, and she could call her Diona there. She thought at that moment that she was lucky since she had seen the foolish girl when the delegation arrived, but she didn't know what to do now. At this moment, Aristine thought that thanks to the Emperor's eyes, she had already seen her, but up close the girl was completely different. But then suddenly Tarkin told Diona that she could go. When the girl heard this, she was surprised. The girl bowed to the princess and after that walked out. When they were alone, Tarkin asked if she hadn't come because she wanted to talk. Aristine then said that they would soon be married, and asked if they needed an excuse to just have tea with him. But the guy leaned back in his chair and said she was just part of his deal. The girl thought that she had not come here from great happiness either. The more she thought, the more she regretted those thoughts in the bathroom. And that's when she tasted the tea. The girl was very surprised because the tea was very delicious. and she thought that it was the first time in her life that she drank such delicious tea, even though she didn't come to this place out of a sense of sincere love. But things here aren't as bad as she thought they would be. As Aristine sipped her tea some more, she said that she hadn't come to him to talk about anything anyway. So she said she would get right to the point, and she asked that they form an alliance. Love, power, to Aristine, it's all not that important and it doesn't matter. What she really wants is money, more money. Because with wealth, she will be able to redeem her freedom and will be able to go wherever she wants and do what she wants. No one else will have the right to keep her in a cage. The girl will be able to see this incredible world with her own eyes, will realize what she could only dream of before. But for this she needs a large amount of money, as well as the power of Tarkin. When the man heard her proposal, he was very surprised. Even though Aristine was able to see past lives thanks to the Emperor's eyes, starting her own business will be very difficult. Then the girl said, lest he misunderstand, she wasn't forcing him to do anything. She doesn't try to borrow money and she doesn't ask for investments either. Certainly she won't say that her business will enrich him. Honestly, this isn't some pyramid scheme or scam. When Aristine looked at him, she thought the word suspicion was written in big letters in his gaze. The girl said she was telling him the plain truth, so she asked that he not look at her like that. Tarkin then said that it meant she was planning to start her own business with her own money. He said he should consider it. But the girl said it wasn't like that. Aristine had never had to negotiate before in her life, and she was not an eloquent speaker. Then she said that the only thing they had in common was a marriage of convenience. Therefore, their meetings are nothing more than the result of political ambitions. In this regard, she thinks it would be good for the two of them to help each other too. She said they didn't have to get closer as a couple, only as business partners. Tarkin appeared as she had the guts to offer him a mutually beneficial partnership. No one had ever dared to ask him to do that before. So he said that, let's say he wouldn't mind helping. But he asked what he would get in return. He leaned closer to her and asked what she could give him. Then Aristine asked him if he really didn't want anything from her. She wondered if he would answer as soon as possible. Though she has already known his desire for a long time, thanks to the Emperor's eyes, she knows far more than people can imagine. But then suddenly Tarkin turned away from her abruptly, the girl thought, as if he couldn't believe what he had just seen. Then he said that her hands were not cane hands, and she could barely hold a fork with them. And how was such a woman going to help him? At that moment, Aristine looked at her hands and said that they were no worse than those of other Imperials. She thought to herself that of course he didn't trust her now. Yes, he heard her arguments, then said he understood. Aristine stood up and said she was coming out. She had to prove herself properly first, and she told them to go then. When the guy asked where to, Aristine said that before she made an alliance, she offered to test what she could do. At this time there were people standing somewhere in the mansion and whispering, "Have you seen the princess? A real tramp. Does she even know what a marriage of convenience is? Is she looking down on us?" Then the other woman said, "Didn't they know? They say that the princess is seriously ill. She even heard that she has a problem with her head. That's why she was kept locked up for 10 whole years. But that's only the secret of the imperial family," said that woman. Another replied that it was unthinkable. How could such a girl be His Highness's wife? The man said that if His Highness Tarkin became the crown prince, it would be the blessed crown princess of their country. A girl confirmed, and said that Irugo's position would definitely be shaken then. Another said that although His Majesty was the Emperor's favorite, the war had come to an end. The girl said that there is no argument. His merits on the battlefield are great, but ruling a country is the same as fighting for it. That's why Prince Hamir is more suitable to be the heir to the throne. But then all of a sudden the guy told her to shut up because Tarkin was walking past them. The girl wondered where he was going. When she looked, she realized that His Majesty's palace was in that direction. One of the maids said it was better to keep his mouth shut. The war was over, which meant that His Highness came to the palace more often. The girl said she was correct, and also complimented that she was already weaned from his profile. But the maid didn't understand how one could still be so attractive. Just look at that exquisite nose and golden eyes, and a whole pack of goosebumps will immediately run through you. Because no one can remain calm at the sight of all this beauty. Even his hair, black as pitch, shimmered in the sun and glistened. But then the girl was suddenly surprised that it was shining so brightly. When she looked closer, she noticed the Princess of Sylvanus walking beside him. The girls didn't realize what was happening because there was no trace of such a strange girl they had seen for the first time. Well, here the girls said that they have no time to be surprised. They need to run to the Empress's palace as soon as possible. At this time, the rulers of the lands of beasts and rod and blood to Emperor Irugo came one of the workers and said that the princess wanted to see him. The worker also said that the princess was accompanied by Tarkin. The emperor was very surprised by this. He didn't understand, for the official meeting with the Sylvanus delegation was scheduled for tomorrow. But then suddenly a girl came up to him, calling him father, and asked him why he shouldn't meet her once. The girl said she was even curious to see what the princess, about whom there are so many rumors, looks like. Second Princess Jenna Karina. What's up? She's about to become part of their family. At this moment, the emperor thought he knew that she, her brothers and sisters, had already met his sister-in-law. The course of her thought was pretty obvious to him. He thought it was cute, told the employee that unless he had a case now, he saw no reason to refuse, and ordered them to be let in. The girl, hearing this, was very happy. At this point, she thought this was all going to be funny, and all she had to do was humiliate the ugly princess right in front of her father. Jenica thought that Tarkin was not himself because of the girl's appearance. She could not believe that he intended to pray to their father for another bride. But then I realized it was impossible, because my father was eager to get his hands on Princess Sylvanus. She was worried at first when she hadn't seen the princess yet, but then she thought there was no need to worry because her father could only spoil her alone. At this point, Aristine walked in on them, and bowing, said she was honored to meet them, and thanked them for agreeing to give her time. When the girl introduced herself, the emperor was shocked, because the girl had graceful hand gestures as well as polished manners. And unlike the second princess, from the first and all but forgotten, he didn't expect much. After a short silence, he told the princess that she must be very tired after the long journey, then turned to the employee and told him to bring them desserts and tea. At that moment, Aristine thought that by watching the others through the spilled water, she was able to memorize palace etiquette. But she didn't know if she could repeat it. But judging by their reactions, she succeeded. By that time, they had already started to bring various sweets to the table. The girl looked at one of them and realized that she had seen this dessert before. It was a light yellow and sour sweet Prin France jelly. It is Irugo's special sweetness. A jelly that has a firmer texture and sweetness that is more intense than the others. Sour and sweet flavors meld together to create a real taste party in your mouth. Even a renowned chef, renowned for being incredibly picky, recognized its unique flavor. But in hostile Sylvanus, it was decided to eat this dessert with a fork and not with hands. When a girl sees it in person, she really wants to taste it. After staring at it longer and longer, she thought she wanted to eat it. But when she wanted to taste it, Tarkin gave her an angry look. Then Aristine realized that now was not the time for that. She hadn't earned her jelly beans yet because she hadn't proven her worth yet. The girl thought that for now she could only dream of her property, which was food. So she put her fork away. Looking at her fiance, she thought to herself not to be alarmed, because her inner skills would definitely be revealed to the fullest. When Tarkin looked at her, he felt a little uneasy. He assumed that she might have something to offer his father. When the emperor looked at them, he saw a beautiful and lovely couple looking at each other with loving eyes. He was surprised at how quickly they found common ground. After a short silence, Nefter turned to the girl and said that the audience was to take place tomorrow. Why did she wish to meet him today? Aristine said he was right, and she had come there for a reason. But then suddenly she was interrupted by other voices. At that moment, a few people came in and said what a coincidence. They had come to see their father, and the princess was already there. The other girl said that it was fortunate for her to have the great honor of meeting the princess of the noble family of Sylvanus. Someone who entered told Tarkin to confess. He was eager to meet the princess because of what he had heard of her beauty. Another said it was obvious after all. The place the lady came from was famous for its painted beauties. When the prince came closer, he said that his brother was very lucky. But when he saw the girl sitting next to him, he was silent. When the fourth Princess Stalina saw her, she thought she was like a different person. As they got closer, the first princess of Phalamion wondered if it was all exactly the same unassuming mouse they had seen at the beginning. And the third Prince Martin just looked at the girl with a loving gaze. When Tarkin saw all this, he thought that each of them was an intimate of the Empress. He doubted they knew of the princess's true form. Then he realized that they were now trying to humiliate her in public. The men showed up before she could even say a word. He suddenly wondered what the princess would do about it. After a brief silence, Princess Aristine asked who they even were. Stalina wanted to say something to her sister, but the latter told her not to act like it offended her. Miena thought it was the same beggar princess. Perhaps she intended to try and confuse them, but either way it was as if there was a different person in front of them now. So why had the Empress withheld such important information from her? But then she decided to forget all about it, because everything should be fine as it was. Then the girl said she was the first princess of Falamian, said she would get away with it this time, but further ordered her to watch her words. "Who is she to treat them like servants?" asked the girl. She nodded to her sister then, and Stalina said, "Had Princess Sylvanus been raised to be so rude to others?" But the first princess said that apparently not too much was expected of her. When Tarkin looked at them, he thought, after a bit of other hypocritical praise, they were back to their old ways. That's the whole point of aristocratic conversations. Empty talk, he'd rather have bloody battles. Affectionate smiles were in fact no different from sharp blades. He never could get used to this masquerade. Here are too many enemies in the palace because of him. The girl listens to abuse she shouldn't have received at her address, and so she should just stay under his protection until things get better. Tarkin told his brother and sisters that he thought they should stop. When Aristine heard this, she thought that now was the perfect chance to show everyone what she could do. The girl thought that he would certainly become her business partner. And at that moment, Martin introduced himself, a little embarrassed. Aristine then approached them and said that they seemed to have a misunderstanding. Miena asked what they had misunderstood, and thought to herself that now this girl was trying to apologize to them. Aristine looked into the girl's eyes and said she didn't care who they were. She was talking to herself at that moment, nothing more. And after that she said that they seemed to have met them somewhere before. Miena was very surprised to hear this. She couldn't believe that the princess was able to memorize her. There were so many people there that she didn't know, so she didn't understand how she could remember her. She thought that she could have pushed her to do it herself. But then Aristine's voice interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to Martin, and she asked him if she and he had never met anywhere before. When the guy heard that, he got embarrassed and said maybe. Well, then he said that he and she must have met before because, come to think of it, he had visited Sylvanus at some point. Aristine then said that she felt like they had met in a completely different place. Martin, laughing, said to her, "And where? In dreams or in dreams?" "Yes, I think you have visited me in dreams." But at that moment the first princess came up to him and squeezed his hand. In that moment, Miena thought that the princess was revealing her true nature, and she wasn't at all as bad as they say she is. She certainly remembers who they are. And after all, everyone knew her as the girl who became a whipping toy in her own homeland. But that one moment proved otherwise. Aristine remembered that once when she was looking at the water in the reflection, the pictures of the outside world she had imagined in her head suddenly began to appear. Ever since then she had been practicing her memory and observation. The Emperor looked at the girl carefully. When the first princess noticed this, she thought that her father was already interested in her. She was even afraid to imagine what would happen if the princess told him what had happened in Tarkin's palace. Then they would pretend not to know her now and make a fool of themselves. She thought she should save her strength. She had a backup plan anyway. But then suddenly Stalina screamed and asked the princess how she could flirt with another man in front of her fiance. Hearing all this, Aristine remembered that this was the same princess who had called her an unsightly mouse with a bad pedigree. Then Stalina asked the princess what she was looking at like that. Or was that also her talking to herself? Aristine looked at the girl and thought it was only contempt in that hostile look. From the outside, this girl seems like an adult, but she's actually still such a child inside. When Stalina wanted to say something else towards the princess, her sister interrupted her and told her to shut up. Then Miena turned to Aristine and told her not to be angry because the fourth princess was still too young. But the girl didn't understand what was going on, and asked what was wrong with her sister. She had just caught her. At this moment Aristine thought she was quite observant. Irugo doesn't have a crown prince yet. The Empress's eldest son, Prince Hamir, and His Highness Tarkin are the main contenders for the throne. The war between the prince factions has been going on for years. Tarkin, unlike his brother, is the son of a commoner, and the girl thought that it's much more complicated than that, because in fact it's a struggle between new and old politicians, a struggle for the right to lead people, and whether in this life or that life, the battle for power remains the same. Then Aristine said she had serious doubts about being part of the imperial family, and she turned to the princesses and asked them to say whether they doubted the nobility of her blood. The ladies are pure-blood Princess Irugo, of course, and after all, it was fate to have to face a half-blood like her. Aristine said that if that was Irugo's position, then there was nothing left for her to do but humbly accept it. At this time, a worker entered the Empress's palace and said that, as she had ordered, the princesses and the prince had gone to His Majesty's reception room. Then she asked if everything would go smoothly. Then the Empress replied that, as she said, it was worth bearing in mind that this was an informal meeting, here to complicate things. The Empress said that her sweet Jenica was there now, and she would surely do her job. Not to mention Phalamion, because despite being the child of a common concubine, the girl is firmly resolved to serve the Empress. It was just at this time that Phalamiena was screaming. They say it doesn't correlate at all with Irugo's stance, and the fourth princess is still too young, which makes her only thinking in categories. Martin and his sister said she is completely clueless about when she should get rid of turnovers and stop. Phalamiena said that it must be very sad to be a person unable to distinguish between wishful thinking and reality, and she apologized to the princess. But Stelina was very surprised. She didn't understand what her sister and brother were talking about. The girl didn't understand where her sweet little sister she knows had gone, why she suddenly changed to that girl's side. Stelina couldn't understand how it had come to this. And Tarkin, who was standing behind them, thought that Aristine had dealt with them very cleverly. The official delegation from Sylvanus will arrive tomorrow, and if their representatives know about this meeting, they will not miss their chance. Although Irugo is still the conditional winner, but the peace treaty is still not in effect, and so now they are walking on extremely thin ice. Import and export rights, trade routes, and mining rights like the princess's childish pranks could be an excuse to help the Sylvanus Empire renew their conflict. Besides, Tarkin's brother and sisters are supporters of Her Majesty. He needs to urgently smooth corners and minimize losses. The only problem was that he didn't know whose side the Emperor would take. When Martin asked for the princess to be merciful, I think the girl hopes that they won't dare to interfere with her further. The first time they met, Aristine had decided to turn a blind eye to their antics and rudeness. Well, that's what she wanted to do then. Yes. Then suddenly she felt someone's eyes on her, and when she turned around, she saw the Emperor staring at her intently. She wondered how long he had been doing that. Aristine thought that even though she had deviated from her original plan, she had still managed to get the Emperor's attention. The girl wondered if that could be considered lucky. She glanced back at him and thought that her person really deserved his scrutiny. If she carelessly crosses the line, the situation will immediately escalate into a conflict between the two empires, because the enemy princess dared to insult his daughter. No need to fall into the Emperor's favor. She is to live in Irugo next to him from now on. She thought to herself, so that the Emperor would not be alarmed. She does not wish to harm him or the Empire. At this moment, looking at them, Phalamiena imagined what this princess might have said. Your Majesty, a sad truth has been revealed from your eyes, for here I have had the misfortune to find nothing but humiliation. Yes, how would they dare to insult the alliance in the name of peace established? The Emperor asked her. Aristine said that they had not only questioned the nobility of her blood, but had slandered her a little earlier. She had heard them loud and clear that day, but they seemed determined to pretend ignorance. Emperor, how dare they be rude to their dear friend from a country with which they have just made an alliance? He would go to any lengths to get the truth out of them, and they would surely be punished for what they had done. When the first princess imagined all this, she thought that if the girl reported it to her father, war would break out, and her reputation as a princess will be stomped into the dirt, and then she'll be in a lot of trouble. Phalamiena thought she had no choice, and things had already gone far enough. She turned to her sister and asked that she apologize to the princess now. At this moment, the girl thought that it was for nothing that they were looking down on her, and for nothing that Phalamiena personally trusted all these rumors. When Stelina continued to remain silent, the girl thought the matter was not taking a good turn, and she became involved in her sister's bad character. But when the girl glared angrily at her sister, Stelina apologized to His Majesty through gritted teeth. When Aristine heard this, she said that apparently she still had something to say towards her. At that moment, Stelina turned to her sister with a questioning look. Phalamiena thought at that moment that she didn't understand hints at all. Then Aristine said she remembered the girl saying something else, something about lowborn. When Stelina tried to say something, Her sister interrupted her and asked her if she thought it was called an apology, and asked that she apologize properly. At that moment, Stelina thought to herself, and after all, she had already apologized. Why should she apologize to this girl at all? She had only pointed out where she belonged. When her sister continued to remain silent, Philomena looked at her carefully and asked if she was the one who had said that rather than constant excuses, it was better to directly admit her mistakes. It was then that the girl spoke. "I am the fourth princess of Irugo, Stelina. I apologize to Princess Aristine." When Tarkin heard this, he couldn't believe it, because the fourth princess, who was famous for her arrogance and defiance, didn't just apologize. Well, and also knelt before her. He suddenly wondered if Aristine was satisfied with revenge for her humiliation. When he looked at her, the girl was smiling, and he thought that by the looks of it, she was absolutely thrilled. Well, to be honest, he'd imagined it quite differently. In Tarkin's imagination, Aristine was almost crying and asking why they were yelling at her. But in reality, she turned out to be stronger. This, he thought, was the reaction of a man who had made the princess of another country fall at her feet with just a couple of phrases. Aristine at this point thought that there was no way she could figure out if Tarkin liked the price to avoid problems. After all, she should still smooth out the corners. At this point, the girl thought she wasn't done yet, and the show was just beginning. Afterward, she approached Stelina and said she never thought it would turn out like this. At this point, the girl reflected that the princess had not demanded an apology from her, nor had she said a scolding word in response. Aristine said she just wanted to see if she wanted to talk to her. The video of her on her knees makes her uncomfortable. Stelina thought her whole look said that such a thing didn't bother her at all. At first she may seem magnanimous and calm. The look of benevolence, the speech, the eyes, just like her father's. When Aristine helped Stalin, by the way, then the emperor thought that was pretty clever. Not only is she well aware of her role in the political arena, but she knows how to use it. It's admirable. But it's self-evident, it's not enough. Then suddenly the emperor spoke and told them to stop because there was no truth in their feet. After that, he asked them to sit down. He told his children that they had broken into someone else's tea party and made a mess of things. They did not understand what they should do now. Then suddenly the voice of Jenica was heard, saying that His Majesty was saying everything correctly. She doesn't understand how they could ruin such a wonderful day at the princess rides. They have angered their sister. The girl said she was sad now. They had ruined the whole first impression of them, even though they would soon be a family. And if the princess thought they didn't love her, when Aristine looked at the girl, she thought she was frail, with snow-white skin, the exact opposite of the natives of Irugo. Her eyes are turquoise, just like her father's. At that moment, Jenica looked toward the princess and said that she was so happy to have another sister. Daughter of Her Majesty the Empress, younger sister of Prince Hamir. This is the first princess in line, and her name is Jenekarina. When she approached Aristine, she asked if she could call her sister. After that, she smiled sweetly. But Aristine didn't understand what this girl was up to. It reminded her of that girl who called her sister when she was a little girl. And she was very happy to be near Aristine. And remembering the situation, Aristine smiled and said that of course she could call her sister. Jenica was very excited when she heard this, and she didn't even believe at first that the princess would actually let her do this. Aristine said she reminded her of a younger sister she had as a child. The girl asked if she meant the second one. Then Aristine confirmed and said that she was quite charming and sweet. At this moment, Jenica thought that it meant she was like the second princess of Sylvanus who was famous for her beauty. The princess had been everyone's favorite light child ever since she came into the world, and even during Aristine's imprisonment, as she watched through the eyes of the emperor. She was like this even when her sister was thrown in jail through her own fault. By then, Jenica had successfully squatted between her brother and the princess. A political marriage without love, those rough dorks scrawled in blood from whom she had met on arrival, and the tall women of Irugo. And here she was, Jenica, the only one who welcomed her into the family and reminded her of her ancestral home. Beautiful and charming no matter how you look at it, and she gets anyone's heartstrings. The girl thought it was the easiest thing for her to do, but she wouldn't want this princess to get too attached to her. But anyway, she must pretend to be her nice friend to please her father. And then Jenica told the girl that if she had any problems, let her go straight to her, because she would always be able to help her in everything. She said that even though it would involve her married life, she would always be willing to listen to her. When Aristine heard this, she thanked her for her help and smiled. At this point, Jenica thought her answer was too simple. Seeing the concern on the girl's face, Aristine apologized and said that she thought she could speak to the princess in a less formal manner. Jenica thought that of course she couldn't, and how dare she even, but said that really the girl just embarrassed her a bit. Aristine hesitated and said that her similarity to her little sister clouded her mind. Did she really say she was like a sister to her, just out of politeness? She's pretty bad at nonverbal rules of nobility. Apparently she just made a mistake and thought Jenica was saying it all seriously. Then the girl said that it was all serious and was getting very nervous. And she herself thought that how could she think it was serious? Only Brother Hamir had the right to call her sister. Aristine got excited and asked then if they were okay, but it only made the girl more angry, and she wondered if living within four walls made people so slow-witted. As soon as the girl wanted to speak, she was immediately interrupted by Aristine and told that her little sister was always respectful, even as a toddler. She never threw words to the wind, and at that moment Martin laughed very hard. When he heard that, Jenica asked what made him laugh so hard. While they sorted out their business, Aristine began to watch the Emperor. When Jenica saw this, she was very surprised and wondered if she was going to suck up to her father again. But then she saw the jello on the table, and thought that she must have never seen a dessert like this before. The girl thought that the princess wouldn't realize that her father always told her to bring Prince jelly to the table just because of her. And then Jenica said, when she saw the jelly, that it was her favorite. When the Emperor heard this, it was as if he remembered it. At that moment someone poked one jelly bean on a fork. Jenica said, wondering if His Majesty had ordered it to be brought for her sake, as always. Then, when she looked at the Emperor, she saw Aristine bringing a fork to his mouth. Everyone present was shocked. Without paying attention to anyone, Aristine told the Emperor to open his mouth. When he did, he asked, "Is she really trying to feed him now?" Then the girl said, "Yes, you got it right, father." Hearing this, Jenica asked how dare she even, by the way, he's their daddy. But then Tarkin intervened in the conversation and said that after the wedding she would become a member of their family, and asked, "What's wrong with starting to call him right now like that?" Then asked her sister if she thought she was being rude to someone who was called her sister a couple minutes ago. The girl didn't know what to say to her. She became anxious and began to stammer. Aristine then said that if His Majesty was against it, she would definitely stop doing that. But at this moment, the Emperor remained silent, just took and ate the jelly that was poked on her fork. The workers who saw this were shocked. They did not understand how this had happened. Ruler of earth and dawn, rod and blood, the cold-blooded stern Emperor completely changed his image in an instant. Only lived, then told the girl that how she would address him didn't matter at all. Some of the servants thought he would scream and order her away. They assumed that the princess was special to him. Jenica thought, does this girl really know her father's secret? Aristine continued to feed the Emperor this dessert, and the whole surroundings were still in shock because he was already eating his third piece. The girl asked if the Emperor liked the dessert. After chewing a little, he said that it was good enough. Seeing the whole picture, Tarkin thought his father had lost his mind. He wondered what about the honor and dignity of the great ruler of Irugo, of which he had always spoken. Aristine, while popping the jelly on her fork, thought it was somehow heavy, but realized that luckily she had dealt with this before, so it wasn't a problem. While living in Sylvanus, she had managed to see out of the corner of her eye her sister feeding the Emperor fruit jelly. The Emperor's eyes allowed her to see it. From that day on, she began practicing by pricking the jelly on a fork. All this little child wanted was to hear her father's coveted praise. The girl thought she was his daughter too. Like her sister, she could do it for him. Later, realizing that she saw it because of the Emperor's eyes, and not because she wished it, she dismissed such rambling thoughts. At that moment, Aristine heard some strange sound, and when she looked over, she saw that Justina had knocked over a cup of tea. She said that it looked like the cup was defective. That's why it fell. Then she screamed, calling the maid, asking how she could let this happen. How dare they serve the set without checking it? When the girl screamed at the maid, Philomena thought she was so worried about it in order to save face in front of her father. Then suddenly, looking at the remaining jelly bean, Aristine realized that she had been a bit distracted. Well, let's go, she thought. She was in no position to give away the Emperor's secret right now. You see, he has a secret that the palace servants don't know. Not even Tarkin knows about it. Princess Jenica has been begging for his jelly for nothing. Everything went deeper. the daughter carefully hides her father's secret. Because the fact is that the emperor has an injured right arm. Even though such a thing may not threaten his life, in times of war such news can affect the morale of the troops and cause turmoil. For this reason, the emperor conceals it by remaining unperturbed. He has to refrain every time from eating a meal that requires special handling of cutlery. Well, the only people who know his condition are the king's attending physician, as well as his daughter, Princess Jenica. Before their guests arrived, the laborer said he would immediately order the jelly to be removed from the table. But the emperor said he shouldn't do that, and he would just give his portion to his daughter. This was surprising because the emperor very often gives his portion to the princess, so they assumed that he just couldn't resist his precious daughter. His Majesty appreciates Prince Tarkin immensely, but she spoils Princess Jenica more than anyone else. Strengthening her older brother's position, Jenica became the emperor's favorite. Yeah, anyway, if she wanted to hide her father's secret so badly, why didn't she bother to feed him herself? Aristine thought. But if she, like Tarkan, knew nothing about it, she too would find such behavior surprising. Aristine thought that the emperor, unable to eat his favorite dessert because of his injury, must feel just awful, and she hoped she wouldn't fall out of favor with him for feeding him. But she couldn't say for sure what his answer would be, because she hadn't had that much contact with people, just because the girl was used to the hostility of an angry stare. But it was very difficult for her to anticipate the other person's actions. After everything happened, the emperor said, even though he had long approved of this marriage, he only now realized that it was the best decision. Since Aristine's appeal for trapezes appealed to him, he should certainly do something for her in return. He asked, what would she want from? When he called her Rin, the girl thought it was the first time anyone had addressed her in so many years. So the name of her father's praise reminded her so much of that occasion. From her childhood, when her sister fed the emperor. Looking at the girl's surprised face, the emperor asked, is she surprised because he used an affectionate abbreviation? Aristine, distracted from her thoughts, said it wasn't that. She was very nervous. She thought it was impossible to convey the use of an affectionate acronym to someone with so much meaning. She had a momentary feeling as if he really was her father. Then the girl said that simply she was very happy and smiled. Again, she took pleasure in knowing that her suffering had paid off. But this time she had more. She could ask for something. So after a bit of thought, Aristine said that she certainly had something she wanted. The workers were shocked because she decided so quickly, it would have taken them longer to think about it. At this point the girl thought let her see her. She would feed the emperor through her ability, but she certainly didn't expect to say something like that. But the end justifies the means, a saying from a past life that describes the incident quite eloquently. The emperor said that if she would just say the word, he would fulfill her every whim. He asked what she wanted, maybe a land rich in mines and jewels, or something bigger. He would do anything for her. The girl thought that she could finally reveal the true purpose of her visit, and she said she wanted to clear Irugo of its reputation as a land of barbarians and ignoramuses. When those present in the room heard this, they were shocked. They did not expect such a turn of events. This moment, Aristine thought that she had, after all, told Tarkin that she would certainly prove her usefulness, and prove herself because she was his successful bargain, which he had signed in advance without reading the terms.